The Supreme Court's Roe v. Wade decision, Congress passing a gun bill, the congressional hearings on the January 6th assault on the Capitol, and the political polarization that seems to affect every aspect of our public lives. There's so much going on with national politics. We want to break it all down with a political expert who follows such things. Ben Gaskins is a political science professor at Lewis and Clark. He teaches courses on American politics, public opinion, the presidency, and on the role of religion in politics. Professor Ben Gaskins, welcome to Eye on Northwest Politics.
Thank you so much for having me, Ken.
Well, let's start with the Supreme Court striking down Roe v. Wade. Does this mean that the interpretation of the Constitution is now a product of who the president can appoint to the high court?
You know, that's one of I guess, the dirty secrets of American jurisprudence is that the Constitution basically says whatever 5 justices on the Supreme Court says it does. And this has been a long time coming, where conservatives going back 50 years now have looked to the courts and changing the composition of the courts so that they can achieve some of their policy goals that they felt were established through the courts to begin with and were unlikely to change through the normal democratic political process. So this is, again, a long-term goal of the conservative legal movement, of social and religious conservatives, is to be able to have a solid majority on the Supreme Court that would be willing to overturn, 50 years of precedent as it comes to Roe v. Wade. So again, this is something that has been looked for quite some time, and with former President Trump being able to nominate 3 members to that Supreme Court, the day finally came where there were 5 votes to overturn Roe v. Wade and to really reestablish a more conservative set of social policies.
Justice Thomas implied that other rights like gay marriage or even contraception could be addressed by the court in the future. Do you see that happening?
Absolutely. And this has happened before in the not too distant past, where the court has overturned itself on things like same-sex relations. In Lawrence v. Texas in 2003, the Supreme Court overturned state-level anti-sodomy laws that had just been reaffirmed in the 1980s. So there is some precedent for the Supreme Court going back on these kind of moral, social issues and right to privacy issues that it had established recently. And the right to same-sex marriage has only been established nationwide for the past 7 years. And so this is something that, again, a lot of social conservatives saw the Obergefell ruling that established same-sex marriage in 2015 as a very egregious, unconstitutional expansion of rights to people who to an issue that is not actually covered in the Constitution. So it is, I think, a project of people like Clarence Thomas and those that are on that side of the debate to try to use this moment where there are 5 votes for a lot of socially conservative policies for religious freedom to really try to roll back some of these Supreme Court decisions going back even decades that have established progressive priorities nationwide.
Does this damage the credibility of the court?
This is one thing we've seen over the past month or so in polling on the court, that the perceived credibility of the court, the approval of the court, and the legitimacy of the court have all been taking a beating in public opinion polls, really since the Roe v. Wade decision was leaked over a month ago. But with a number of these other issues that the public, at least a majority of the public, sees as being primarily political rather than legal or constitutional. So even though social conservatives are winning on the issues, it is at the expense of the perceived legitimacy of the court and the approval of the court. And most Americans seeing it now as just another political body, which I think affects the way that the Supreme Court will be respected, legitimized, and these decisions perhaps protected going into the future, because if these are political decisions, it gives more cover to then go back against them should the composition of the court change as well.
You study religion and politics, and in addition to the Roe v. Wade decision, the Supreme Court affirmed the right of a high school football coach to pray publicly after games, and they also said that religious educational institutions could receive public funding. How have religious beliefs influenced the court's decisions, and is that a good thing?
Well, it depends, of course, on your stance on those issues. But as you said, we've seen recently the court really make pretty strong movements in the direction of religious freedom, especially for evangelical Christians who have long lamented removing prayer from public schools as one of the reasons for national decline, who have long been pushing for religious schools, especially Christian schools, to be treated on an equal and fair playing ground with secular public education. And the court over the past few decades has from time to time moved in slow fashion in this direction, but we've seen the court again have a fairly solid majority that is much more willing to go further in protecting public prayer, even if it's on school grounds by school employees, to allow for public funds to go to religious schools to help to support their mission and their efforts as well. And so even as religion is changing, the character of religion is changing in the United States, as secularization continues as well, we're seeing religious institutions really have a friendly hearing at the current Supreme Court and get a lot more support and policy victories than we have seen at any point in the recent past. So religion is certainly, especially conservative Christian religion, is certainly making headway at the national level through the courts, and are using the courts again to push back on decisions of 50 years ago that they feel really trampled on their rights, on their privileges, and on their freedoms.
You've been following the January 6th hearing. What impact do you think the claims of election fraud and the efforts to overturn the election have had on the presidency and on the public confidence in elections generally?
I think, to take the latter part, confidence in elections has taken a huge hit, especially among conservatives who really, by and large, do believe in President Trump's assertions that the election was stolen and that President Biden is somehow illegitimate because of electoral fraud. And this is really percolating down to the state and local level to elections officials, secretaries of state, and other public officials who are charged with running our elections. And just I think the broader, more general issue is that trust in government at all levels seems to be really taking huge hits on the right and the left. The belief that government can do positive things for our lives, can make a positive difference in the direction of the country, seems to be waning pretty significantly. And that lack of trust, whether it's the Supreme Court, the presidency, state and local politics, has huge ramifications for broader society, for policy, politics, and everything that affects our daily lives. And so I think the perception of elections and the trustworthiness of them is just the tip of the iceberg. And in many ways, it's kind of the canary in the coal mine to show the number of ways that Americans across the spectrum, but especially on the political right, are really losing trust in our institutions, in our politics, and in the politicians that are charged with upholding our democracy.
We've got a little less than a minute to go, but along those lines, America seems more divided along political lines than ever. Is it just perception, or are we more divided, and why?
I think there is a strong degree to which we are more and more sorted, that even if we're not more polarized, people's identities and ideologies and beliefs are increasingly in alignment, and people are finding their political tribe that thinks, behaves, believes like they do religiously, culturally, and getting more into their cultural silos. And another big divide that gets a little bit less attention is there's a huge divide between those who are engaged in politics and those who are less engaged. And so you see on social media, on Twitter, people getting into these echo chambers with other like-minded people and really driving the conversation among those who are passionate about politics. And a lot of Americans simply don't really care about politics. They see it as corrupt or unpleasant and want to remove themselves. So not only are we divided on the issues and on our culture, our beliefs, but we're also divided on the amount of care and attention we are taking with our government, with our policies, and with our politics.
Professor Ben Gaskins, thank you for joining me on Eye on Northwest Politics.
Thank you again.
Next, outdoor school programs on the brink. Portland Tribune managing editor Dana Haynes tells us why and what needs to change. Next in our Give Me a Minute.